the Evolution Security Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to the EvoSec podcast. This is Aaron Davis and Eric Davis, the Tactical Twins. Always a blast to get to hang out with you, brother. How you doing today?
Doing wonderful. Super pumped about this episode. I've been waiting to do this for a while with my brother across the virtual screen there.
Yeah, you and I have talked about having him on for a while too, so I'm glad that we finally made it happen. So we would like to welcome Justin Ball, retired special operations medic and an all-around super cool dude and a good friend of Eric's, and I'm looking forward to getting to know him too a little bit on this interview. But welcome, Justin. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, thanks, man. I'm doing really good. Good to meet Eric's double. You're in Oklahoma, Aaron, right?
I am in Oklahoma. I used to want to leave Oklahoma until I got back into the shooting sports, and then I realized it's one of the best places in the country. So I'm good to go here. Hoping one of these days Eric comes back.
But eventually.
Yep. Yeah, Eric can't come back because he and I run the 6 a.m. JiuJitsu program Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I gotta have.
So I might have to fly out there and see who wins a match. I'm pretty sure it'll be you, but I'll do my best.
Yep.
So
I argue Justin is the lead. I'm just going to say that right now.
Well, buddy, thanks for coming on. Thanks for spending your time with us. I think we're going to have a lot of fun here, but why don't you go ahead and give a quick bio so everybody can get to know a little bit about you?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, man, and honored to be with you guys. I looked at your guys' guest list. Names like Rob Latham jumped out at me, and you had some heavy hitters on here. So, man, honored to share what I can with you guys. So I recently retired, a couple of years ago off of active duty in the Army. I retired as a sergeant major, and I did most of my time at a special mission unit at Fort Bragg. So I started out as an Army Ranger, 11 Bravo saw gunner in a squad, and I during when I was in Ranger Regiment, they would just kind of like, hey, point at different schools. And I remember the day when they pointed at my roommate and they're like, dude, you're going to bus driver school. And they pointed at me and they were like, you're going to EMT school. And I didn't realize it, but Ranger Regiment at the time had a really intensive emphasis on combat medicine. And so, man, I was at 3rd Ranger Battalion, and I'm just super grateful that I got hooked on medicine there. So I had no intent of becoming a medic, but I was at this little community college at night as a private in the Ranger Regiment, getting my EMT certification. I had a Vietnam vet, 18 Delta, teaching the program. Super cool guy, and man, I was hooked from there. So I went pre 9/11. I went to SF from regiment, and man, my company, my platoon, jumped in to Afghanistan on the initial invasion while I was in language school. sitting in a cinder block classroom with no windows, learning Tagalog while the invasion went on. It was like, I've made a horrible mistake. But no, man, no regrets there at all. but yeah, so I did the Special Forces medic thing and went out to 1st SF group, and I know you guys are familiar with Kyle Lamb, but he was one of my shooting coaches out there.
Nice.
He's gone.
Yeah, he was still active duty, and man, that's where my love for shooting really developed. And like Kyle, we all carried like a Beretta M9 92F, and it was like like Kyle would call it like the Italian pizza gun, and it was really hard to shoot, man. It's a really crappy, mass produced pistol, and there's nice modified Berettas now, but man, it's like really hard to shoot 10 rounds in the 10 ring at 25 meters with that thing, and I got really good shooting that M9, and it was cool because Kyle's attitude was like, quit complaining about your gun and just learn how to shoot it really well. So I got really into shooting there. And then I applied to be a medic out at the special mission unit out here and did that for the rest of my career, so I was there for quite a bit. I went to Afghanistan with 1st SF group, and then I got back to Bragg, and then it was just like Iraq over and over and over and over again until that thing wrapped up, After that, did a little bit of deployments to other places, Africa, North Africa, and whatnot. But, my combat experience, I know we're probably going to dig into it a little bit more later, but like, especially the combat medic stuff, man, it's just like every war is such a different world, even shifting from Afghanistan to Iraq, those are very different conditions. And, so there's like lessons to be learned all over the place with those two conflicts, fortunately, like I never had to work on a buddy. And I think people hear my background and they're like, oh, you must have done so much stuff, but like, I thank God every day that I never had to work on one of my mates. I worked on plenty of folks. And we were often assisting the Army doing their thing, trying to advise and assist them. So I worked on plenty of U.S. soldiers, but, that's one of those things that I count as really fortunate, because I have, a bunch of friends that are highly accomplished medics, man, and having to work on their friends is just like, it's a whole new burden, that I think, yeah, man, that in the civilian world, some people experience that, but if you're a medic on the street in the US, in some cities are pretty rough towns, but it's pretty rare that you got to work on one of your friends, and I think, we're going to talk a bit more later about stress and stress physiology and stuff. But like, I think it's when it's one of your friends, that's a whole new level of stress. And that to me is one of the things I wanted to chat with you guys tonight about training, is like really anticipating and being honest about how stressful a condition is and adapting your training and your techniques for, the fact that like, yeah, there's combat trauma medicine, and then there's combat trauma medicine on your friend, and like your families hang out, and man, stress can just go through the roof in those situations.
Well, and Justin, I've mentioned to you before, by the way, welcome to the show, man. I was about to jump right into the discussion, but man, it's awesome finally having you on. I think I mentioned you possibly coming on, I don't know, 4 months ago, something like that. So it's an honor to have you on, buddy, for certain. So one of the things that I can't believe that I haven't closed the loop on is getting some refresher training from you, or Aaron, you may recall this isn't that big of a deal, but and Justin, you may recall when my brother and I went to Alabama to take the complete combatant class I told you about, Cliff Byerly. After one of the scenarios, he had us apply a tourniquet, and he timed us 11 seconds, and I can tell you, I have experience putting tourniquets on, but I did not get my tourniquet on at that point at 11. I was disappointed in myself. I'm like, I got this. Nope. So, and it was right after a long scenario. So I think that was the reason that Cliff had us do that. But anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. I want to get back.
No, man, I'm just a quick comment, man. I'm glad you brought that up, because Man, one of my pet peeves is like the tourniquet market, and how different vendors kind of prey on like the need for people to have tourniquets, and like they got to be so blessed simple, man. And I think one thing people miss a lot is that, we talk about self-application, but like self-application in the dark with all your kit on. And like a lot of times people will use tourniquets where they use their teeth to pull the strap and tighten it. And it's like, sometimes it doesn't work when your armor is sticking out just a little bit. And guys got real streamlined armor now even, but that's one of my pet peeves, because I know a guy who got shot in the humerus, man, right in the bone and he actually said on helmet cam, I think my arm's off. He got shot right through the upper arm bone, and his hand was twisted around backwards, and he had to put his tourniquet on over basically his arm didn't work. So it wasn't like he could fit his arm through the loop, man. He had this dangling arm, feed that thing over the top, cinch it up, and tighten the windlass and save his own life, And so it's like that one-handed application, especially law enforcement officers, that to me is like a really big deal, because man, they put themselves in such harm's way without the cavalry with them and without a medic on scene that's going to maybe render aid or buddy aid, So it's like, man, if I was a cop today, I would be all over that one arm tourniquet drill.
That's what I was going to ask you. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah. So maybe we didn't want to go down this road yet, but man, I just think it's a good point to ask this question. Now, it's so funny. I carry a very simple ankle med kit. It's got a soft T-wide tourniquet in it. It's got a couple of chest seals in it, and it's got some Celox hemostatic gauze in it. Now, I need to at least dry fire my tourniquet. And I had a reminder to do that, and I've skipped it. So, man, I dry fire quite a lot, my pistol and everything, but man, need to dry fire my tourniquet for sure. Now, so that 11 seconds that Cliff had us do, so how quick, I know it's different situations and different injuries, but let's just say a femoral shot. How fast does someone need to have a tourniquet applied to something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think the assumption, leads to, I think, a pretty big training scar, which is like, hurry so fast that you might screw this thing up, And like one of the biggest problems with tourniquets is misapplication, and like with a cat, if the windlass isn't secured inside those two Kydex keepers, that's kind of a big deal. And it really, it's when you're transferring your casualty from a litter to a helo or whatever, and it gets bumped, and that's the thing we're trying to avoid, And I think when people, it lends to people freaking out and not staying calm and being like, all right, I'm shot. I've done this 100 times. I put my own tourniquet on my legs, my arms, both sides. I got it. And walking through this thing nice, like slow, smooth, and correctly applied. So I think putting a time standard on it, I would be hesitant to do that, and I would want to make sure that it is absolutely correct under stress versus fast, And I haven't witnessed a situation where somebody was hit and they were bleeding so bad that everyone was like in a dead panic to get a tourniquet on. And the thing is, like, but I've watched probably around 200 animals that were severely wounded, like with training induced arterial bleed for quite a long time. And I watched people flail, like not get good hemorrhage control, have somebody step in, help them out. And the thing lives, through this scenario. The thing is, like, you don't know, like, do they live after that, because they all kind of get euthanized during training. But, watching those like catastrophic bleeds that you induce with a scalpel, I mean, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but trying to induce an arterial bleed with a pistol shot or with a rifle shot is like, it's really hard to do, but man,
Interesting.
you know, a knife wound is just like you can get in there and like completely transect the artery and the vein, you know, and get a really, really bad bleed and still get it stopped, you know? So I think, you know, yeah, we're really training for gunshot wounds, but man, if you can stop bleeding on a knife wound, on an animal model, like that's really good training and stress inoculation. I know, a quick comment on that. You know, people have varying opinions on the live tissue stuff, and it's controversial and whatnot. And I know they're you know, the mythical they are always trying to create different training models so we don't have to do that. But man, a living creature in front of you will make your hand shake, but a mannequin will not, and a role player will not make your hand shake. Like, I don't care. And there's something about this like real thing sitting in front of you where you are sort of feeling some, I don't know, some kind of attachment to it. And man, people's heart rates go up, and it's, man, that I'm so grateful for that stress inoculation during training, and lots of it to where it's like, you have this confidence that's like, man, you know, when an instructor is completely trying to hose you and give you the worst bleed they can possibly create, and you stop it, there's a level of confidence there that's just unbelievable when somebody's really bleeding in front of you. And usually, like, you know, they're not that bad of bleeds from gunshot wounds. And so you're like able to gain control, you know, calm down everybody in a situation and be like, hey man, it's good. We're dripping. It's oozing. We got this. Let's get a tourniquet on, nice and easy. Maybe take the time to cut the sleeve back and apply it exactly in the right spot. You know, those are the scenarios that I've seen, but I have seen people flail on those knife wounds where they're just like, blood's coming out and they're freaking out. And if they just do all the stress stuff our mom told us to do, like slow down, take a deep breath, focus on what we're doing, you know, think about it just for a second. One training scar that I saw all the time is, for some reason, people would like immediately jam their hand into this bloody mess. And then they would fish with their other hand into their kit, trying to get their equipment out. When in fact, if you were able to hit timeout and go, wait a minute, just get your kit out and stop the bleed before you just make yourself one-handed by jamming one hand into the wound. That really isn't doing much, you know? And so I think there's this element of like, when people see bleeding, man, everybody's heart rate goes way up, vision narrows, especially if it's your friend, and the ability to just back off, calm down. Well, it's hard to calm down, but back off, take a deep breath, think about what you're doing. You know, I do a lot of work now, you know, as a therapist, a mental health therapist, where I talk about how the brain works, especially with kids and managing their emotions. And I'm like, man, I wish I had this stuff 20 years ago, because being on the battlefield, I see it now. It's very similar to kids losing emotional control. It's like, sometimes stuff is just too stressful, you know, and you got to have the ability, if you can't back off and slow down and get it done correctly, it's totally a thing where somebody else steps in and says, hey man, take a deep breath. You're doing fine. Let's just get this bleeding stopped. Do you need any help? Can I get you another piece of equipment? You know, and just that calming voice can really help your brain calm down and get control of the situation. So, all right, I'll stop there. Back to you guys.
Oh no, man, that's awesome stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I agree, Justin. I'm enjoying listening. I am good, and I'm going to leave this on the air. I just had to clear some space on my computer. So if I was being rude looking around, my computer was getting full, so I had to drop some data off there. But yeah, like Aaron was saying, this is awesome content and education for both Aaron and I and our audience. So
well, yeah. I do, and what you did do is you alleviated some of my concerns about, especially now. Again, I need to dry fire one arm, one-handed application for sure. Now, but real quick, How many deployments did you go on? You said it sounded like quite a few years, or at least how many years were you overworking?
Yeah. So I think my wife's the one that keeps count. She's bitter. No, I mean, she's proud to have made that sacrifice, but man, she kept a good count. So I think it was at like 6 or 7, and coming in later, I was a pre 9/11 guy. I was in the SF training pipeline during 9/11, but I joined in 97. I looked at, my compadres there at Bragg, and a lot of them like came in post 9/11 as Army Rangers. And man, it was nuts. Like 11, 12, 13 deployments, just like back to back to back to back to back. I mean, they would come home, like train, refit, and then just deploy again on this continuous cycle, So I know how hard it was on me and my family to have that many deployments. And I also know that, man, I like the guys to the left and right of me, a lot of them had double that, if not more, just nuts, man.
Well, we are, all of us in the United States are in a debt to guys like you. I mean, obviously I was a veteran as well, but man, you guys, the things that you guys have had to do in the deployments, hat tip to you guys and your brothers for certain. So thank you for that sacrifice, and thank your wife, because I know all about that as well. My wife, her dealing with, a baby or a toddler all those years with me gone, and it does take a toll for certain.
Man, dude, I got to throw in a comment here about, your first responder listeners, man. So I grew up in a police family, man. So brother-in-law, both my older brothers and my dad, all cops. And like, I grew up in that sort of lifestyle. And there's like an element of like concern there, like this constant concern about your dad or your loved one, And I think, now that I'm doing the whole mental health bit and working with people, and I've got to work with a few cops, man, and it's been really eye-opening and helpful to get that perspective that like, dude, veterans get all the attention. Meanwhile, our cops are like doing this stuff every day. And like, it's my theory that cops are the new Vietnam vets, man. They're basically getting the equivalent of shit thrown on them in the airport.
Oh yeah.
And I guarantee you, give it about 20 years, and our generation is going to look back and be like, I cannot believe what we did to our law enforcement officers, man. Like, what were we thinking? Just like that generation was like, man, I can't believe we treated veterans so horribly after Vietnam, But it's like how are we not noticing like the damage you do to somebody who's sacrificing so much to just keep your family safe and put up with nonsense all day long to try to help, and then like,
and not the greatest pay either.
No, and nitpick every single thing that they're doing. And I think I saw one of the titles of one of your guys' shows about recruiting, and it's just like, I got to listen to that show because I don't know how you recruit when the atmosphere in America is like is the way it is.
Yeah, that I remember that episode. It was an enlightening show. I think you would enjoy it, buddy.
And then Eric, there's also the episodes with Chuck Haggard that we had right after. Forgive me if it was Ferguson. So Ferguson, Missouri was the Michael Brown case. But recently, right, we had the major riots in Minnesota, wasn't it? Guys, forgive me if I'm mixing up my events here, but after
like
that,
with Rittenhouse and whatnot,
he was saying, right, that everybody he knew that could get out was getting out, because it was like, screw this, I'm not taking another chance. I'm not taking any more chances of me getting in on some terrible event like this. So I'm
leaving. And remember also, we got a lot of our buddies, of course, a lot of our training partners and buddies, we are involved in the industry, are all saying, hey, a lot of cops, they just won't go to certain calls.
Yep.
Or will avoid some calls because, this sounds like that one call that's going to get me hemmed up and get the press on me and get a rogue prosecutor after me. Yeah, and to your point, Justin, I think at some point the crime rates that have been rising. We had in 2019 a 30% increase in murder, and then violent crime went up drastically as well. And I blame a lot of the anti-law enforcement BS in both the media, politicians, and exactly what you're talking about is that the proverbial shitting on the cops has been popular when folks that have been doing that are now going, oh no, we want the police back in our neighborhoods.
Man, from the mental health aspect, people will come in and like, we'll look at what's going on with them, and then usually sort of like a real basic thing is cognitive behavioral therapy, right? You're looking at their cognitions, how they're thinking, and how that affects their feelings and their behavior, and vice versa. They're all kind of mutually supporting thoughts, feelings, behavior. And one thing we do in that is we call out cognitive distortions, jumping to conclusions, overgeneralizing, reading people's minds, projecting in the future, like all this crap that we all do all the time. And it just blows my mind, man, how many people, are, especially in the media, like doing all those cognitive distortions and calling it news. You got 330 million Americans, and we focus in on the worst crap that happened anywhere among those 330 million people every single day. And then you start to get generalized, and you're like, man, of course there's some bad cops. Like, of course there are, but
because they're
like
humans.
And like, that's all we hear about. And next thing you know, you generalize and you say like cops in general have an issue with power, or you catastrophize and you're like, law enforcement's going to hell in a handbasket in this country. And it's like, man, we know on the mental health side, like you can't do that. And if you do, you get anxious and you get depressed and things don't go well in your life, So it's just crazy to me. It's like when I we can't watch the news in my house, man. That was like a tradition with my dad. Like I'd watch, the news every night with my dad, and it was current events. And like I tried doing that with my kids, and it was just like, oh my gosh, man, it's like such a downer every night, focusing on all the worst things. And it's like, man, you sit down with your kids to catch up on current events, and it's just like murder and mayhem. And you're like, and it's like they're preying on us, man. They're focusing on all the catastrophic things in one day, and it's not good, man. It's not good for us.
Well, and Justin, all the individuals that are Monday morning quarterbacking the decisions of a police officer, and in some cases they may be bad decisions, but in the bulk of the most recent, minus George Floyd, that situation was definitely that. I'm not going to say his name right now, but that police officer, he absolutely deserved punishment for that incident. Not necessarily at the very beginning, but at the end. Now, all that said, the other most recent incidents, the bulk of those were proper decisions made by law enforcement. In some cases, their lack of jiu-jitsu in some cases may have led to some of those situations going further than they should have. That's another discussion for other experts on that. But I guess what I was getting at is that folks in the media and folks that have never been in any kind of level of stress that police officer or police officers were in are the ones saying what they would have done. But if you put those same individuals, even in just a scenario with some Sims guns, and they're going to make even worse decisions, and then not know that they even did it, in many cases.
Let's take a quick break to mention Tenacor, who we're very honored to have as a sponsor of our show. They are the most innovative holster and carry solution producer in the market. Now, my current carry rig is a Glock 48 and a Cartoon 3. I also carry an extra mag and an Abdo AIWB mag pouch. And then, of course, there's the awesome Zero belt. Now, the Cartoon 3 is actually designed well for both appendix or hip inside the waistband carry. The key is the multiple ways you can adjust the camming bar, the cant, and the ride height. This allows it to be actually equally suited for both carry methods. The Abdo mag pouch is equally adjustable and thoughtfully designed. Now, the Zero belt. If you don't need a holster, at least grab a Zero belt. There is nothing like it, period. Now, I've just mentioned a few items here, but they have much, much more. And lastly, Tenacor wants you to be satisfied. If you aren't satisfied, they'll refund your money and pay to even have the product sent back to them. You can't lose, so go to Tenacor.com for carry gear that's as good as it gets.
One of the things I wanted to talk with you guys about was just like the stress management thing, and like you guys work with a lot of folks with stressful jobs, and like, man, those situations go from 0 to 60 in like a couple words, and it's like you're just responding to a call or whatever, and then you're in the fight of your life, just kind of crazy. And I know we were talking quite a bit about how we train and stuff. One thing, and you guys use the term stress inoculation, and I use that example of doing like live tissue training to stop bleeding, but man, I am convinced that jiu-jitsu is, Brazilian jiu-jitsu is a stress inoculation tool, on so many different levels, man, because, experiencing yourself outrun your headlights, physiologically, where you're like completely smoked, like you went through your entire gas tank and somebody put a real easy choke on you and ended, and you're like, apparently, I did not manage my energy efficiently, and pushing it to those limits. I think it's a big deal. So I think people often look at the jiu-jitsu as like learning how to defend myself or this cool martial art, but I'm convinced, man, like there's so much of handling life, especially handling an emergency, that comes with, having, man, like I was like a Kool-Aid drinking CrossFitter way back in the day, heart rate through the roof, doing these crazy workouts. And I still get more smoked than I ever, rolling with people than I ever did doing a CrossFit workout,
Wow.
But man, I thought of something that might be useful, to share with you guys. So I knew a special forces doctor that became an astronaut, and his name is Drew Morgan. He's famous. He was up at space station, a few years ago, and just a super cool
Incredible
guy. He's one of those guys that pisses you off because he's so good at everything, and he's like, I'm going to stop being an emergency medicine doctor now and become an astronaut. And you're like, thanks for that. Thanks for doing two things that I don't have the horsepower to do in the same lifetime, But man, we went and we got to visit him and do kind of like a key leader engagement and see like what goes on at NASA in the astronaut training program. And of course they have like all that pool work that they do, which is like stress inoculation. It's not space, but it's analog. It's the pool, and they're in all the same equipment, doing all the same stuff, rehearsing everything. But he talked about how they'll fly jets, and he's like, look, I'm a physician astronaut. I didn't fly the jet. I sat, I sat in the back, but there's work that you got to do. And man, super high speed stuff going on. Decisions need to get made. Emergency procedures need to be fresh in your mind. Like, it's no joke being in a jet, And he talked about how the reason they do that is it's an analog. It's like, it's not being in a space shuttle, but it's really, really similar to being in a space shuttle. So if you can develop the neural pathways to manage a high stress, rapidly unfolding situation, like, hurtling through the air in a jet, like that, I think that would stress me out, like having work to do in a jet, and like not crashing, number one, but being functional. So he talked about the Russians and that they don't have the same budget. So they skydive and do tasks whilst skydiving. and he said, but that's like their version. They're kind of like low budget version of like, hey, you have to do some kind of analogous training that's pushing you stress wise to the limit. So you realize your own limits and really get used to that adrenaline dump in your system and how bad it messes with you, you know, and it messes up your thinking and your actions and your ability to handle stress, you know? So I wanted to share that with you because I think
It's cool.
Jiu-jitsu is that, like, it's available all over the place and done well. You know, I don't care what your job is. If you get stressed out on the mat, you know, and push yourself harder than you probably should and continuously lose because you made a bad decision, that's good, man. That is good stress inoculation. I think it's hard though, so people don't want to do it.
Yeah, and Justin, Aaron and I can't agree with you more. And you know, it's one of those things we tell people all the time that, you know, if you're not doing jiu-jitsu, it could be one of the best things in your life or changes in your life, because jiu-jitsu does change people. You know, if they really give it a try, and they don't even have to stick it out to, you know, make blue, purple, all the way black. They don't have to necessarily do that. We would like them to, but you know, just experiencing it for a period of time can change people. And, you know, Craig Douglas of ShivWorks, you know, he says something that I think is very valuable. He says that mindset is not a verb. And, you know, in the self-defense community, that's something that's said all the time. And this is why I keyed into some of the things that you've been sharing, is that mindset is a way that some folks in the training community say, hey, you just need better mindset. You know, you need to nail the mindset piece and you're going to be safer. But then they don't talk about how you develop that mindset. And, you know, and in many cases, these folks don't even know themselves. You know, they just may be good at shooting, or maybe they have experience in other areas in self-defense. But that, back to what Craig states about mindset's not a verb, and how do you develop mindset for dealing with stress? You just hit it on the head. One of the first places you can start is jiu-jitsu. You know, you mentioned the astronauts and their methods, and the Russians. You know, everything boils down to, if you want to develop mindset, you got to do hard things, right? Would you agree with that? And kind of what you were saying.
Yeah, you know, on that, I mean, you do hard things, but like jiu-jitsu is fun too. You know,
Absolutely.
And I think there's a component of that too, where, man, I'm really selling jiu-jitsu. So like,
Good.
You're welcome to anybody who had a bunch of students join after listening to this podcast. But man, I think that's part of the deal. And you watch like the Gracie University stuff, and like Henner and Heron, they're always talking about, you know, keeping it playful and keeping it fun. You know, and I think too, like military free fall operations is another example, right? Like, it's not fun. You know, that's not fun. You know, it's like a lot of pressure because it's not skydiving. It's getting from A to B correctly, safely, as a group. You know, it's like really hard.
And pulling the chute at the very end. Is that what you're saying? Because I've never jumped out of a plane.
Well, to me, it's like way harder when you just like exit immediately, pull and travel as a group, because man, there's just like there's so much crap that can go wrong. But in order to stress inoculate for that, we civilian skydive. We have fun with it, you know, and you know, guys will rack up hundreds and hundreds of fun civilian jumps. And it's like, you know, I remember we're getting
I love that comparison.
We got scrutinized for it. Like, man, why these guys are like flying in formations and doing all this civilian nonsense. And it's like, man, when that guy steps up on the ramp and he's like, dude, I've got 300 skydives. I got this. Yeah. You know, there's nothing in the confidence that you have in your leadership, who you're like, man, that guy's been skydiving for like 15 years. He's probably got 1,000 jumps. every certification, you're really like looking at a black belt in that regard. And then your stress comes down a little bit too on doing something where it's like, it's night, combat equipment. It's not fun at all. It's way too cold, and there's like nothing fun about what you're about to do, but it's cool. We included like a fun analog training to like help bring the stress down a bit. And like, I think jiu-jitsu is that same thing, and it's available to everybody.
Well, Justin, what's cool for guys like myself and Aaron, myself, not having been in a combat MOS or especially like yourself in special forces, I think it's helpful to people to hear you state those examples of what can really help the lay person or the person that isn't in those types of jobs. And secondly, the dichotomy of that is you're also helping young men and women that are going into tough military jobs, especially, the young men that are getting into jobs like you used to do. So I think that's really cool, because, I've never heard it put that way, but it does absolutely make sense, for certain. That's good stuff.
I'll interject real quick. So I definitely have been in jiu-jitsu, and I've been in it way too long to have just gotten my blue belt. But I will still say this. It is fun, but I digress a little bit, and this isn't braggadocious. It's just that I'm a pretty decent shooter. I am more a guitar player than anything. 35 years of playing that and still getting paid to do that. I'm an accountant too, and I did really well in school. Straight A's, all that jazz. But jiu-jitsu is the hardest thing I've ever done. It's now, maybe if I put more time into it, it wouldn't seem so hard to me. But that's part of. I've changed schools, and tomorrow I'm gonna hit my first ridiculously early class like you guys do. I'm hitting a 5:30 class tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. But I think that my new school is going to be a little bit more fun and more encouraging for me to hit the mats harder and more. But still, I don't know if, guys, I'm asking you, does it still feel so difficult to you, even though it's fun?
It's always difficult. Some nights I have that feel easier than others, or some mornings. But man, it's always still difficult in both my mind and my body.
That's one of the main things is again, so I've got a decent acumen for complex things mentally, but that's where I am with the difficulty of jiu-jitsu is the mental execution of, it's not just like, I've got some decent boxing form. That kind of happens with having mental reps and watching your twin brother teach you Thai boxing for a few years. But to me, that's there's not a ton mentally that you have to do to work on that. I know it doesn't look good on video here, but that's an execution of a jab, right? And then a right cross. But to execute a jiu-jitsu technique, it's 12 steps, right? 6, 10, 12 steps. So mentally, keeping all those things, together and executed, there's, especially in a roll, you can't just nail those particular steps and techniques perfectly. Sometimes it's like wiggling your way to that submission or position. But again, just mentally, it's still a challenge to me.
Well, Aaron, and I think I jumped in on that question because you asked both of us. But Justin, your thoughts on Aaron's question about is it still hard? Does it still mentally and physically tough
Yeah. So, man, Eric knows where I'm going to go with this, man. I'm gonna give him my plug for the 36. So I felt like you did, Aaron, for a long time, man. Where I was just like, you learn this cool move and then you never pull it off on anybody, and you keep defaulting back to like your earliest jiu-jitsu, especially under stress, and you're like, pull people in the closed guard and survive, and that's fine. But then like you spend a whole evening working on like a berimbolo back take that's really cool, or like a choke using your opponent's gi against them, choke them out with their own clothes, and it's really cool. And then you're like in the middle of a roll, and you're like, crap, like this would probably be an opportune time to use that, and I just can't remember all the 12 steps, So Eric and I kind of stumbled into this. We had this morning group, and it was for the most part like blue belt and above, just coming in to drill. We knew there's like all these stuff we have to drill, and the group just for whatever reasons shifted to like brand new people who needed like jiu-jitsu 101. And I went back to like the Gracie University stuff, and I'm like, oh, there's this Gracie Combatives thing. It's 36 moves, whatever. And then I'm hearing the history of it. And man, they spend like a half hour on the trap and roll, a half hour on just taking the back, a half hour like on all these different 36 moves. And then they talk about how they analyzed all these street fights in Brazil, and like they basically built a UFC curriculum for the army, and that was the 36. And they're like, hey, this will make you a competent on your feet and on the ground. Self-defense, like whatever. And man, it like blew my mind, because I had done Army combatives a bunch of different times. Like I'm like you, Aaron, I was a white belt for like 10 years, and I would go in and out of these different combative ups, learned all this, but man, it got diluted so much. And when I got to hear it, from the grandsons of Haleo, and they heard it from the horse's mouth, it was like, oh, that's why we train these moves. And, I know Eric, I talk about it in the morning with our group all the time about how like, it's really hard to pull off a closed guard armbar, like when people know it's coming. But man, when somebody grabs your neck and tries to punch you in the face, that move just happens, man. You lock them up in a closed guard armbar. And man, cause I kind of like threw that move away. I was like, you don't need that. So just focusing on those original 36 moves that they distilled it down to, man, you talk about being a white belt for a long time. I've said for a while, man, like a well-trained white belt is a killer. If you think about it, man, that skill set, like, quite a few different ways to break people's joints and choke them unconscious and keep yourself safe and take them to the ground and control them, like all with the original 36, man. So I'm so grateful that all those brand new white belts showed up, and me and Eric had to go back to square one. Yep. And
it's been helpful around for both of us, for certain.
And don't get me wrong, man. I watched a whole instructional from De La Riva himself. I found it on YouTube. Like they go to Brazil, interview, I think it's like Ricardo De La Riva, who started jiu-jitsu in 1980, in Rio de Janeiro, but to hear it from him of like what that De La Riva guard was and why he invented it, so I'm still into all the sport jiu-jitsu as well. But man, I really think, going back to that 36, it's beautiful, man. It's efficient. It's pretty simple. And they built all these fight simulations into it, and like, Eric has been able to work a lot of your guys' training into our morning classes with that, where it builds right off of the stuff that you guys are doing, and it goes back and forth. So anyway, so that's awesome. My soapbox on the 36.
Well, and just for our audience out there, Justin's a solid purple belt, working towards his brown belt. So he's got a solid background, and for him to understand that the 36 is that important, it's something that, and frankly, Justin, you convinced me of that as well. When you brought that as an idea for the fact that our that our current folks showing up in the morning, a majority of them are new. And so, yeah, that was a solid idea for sure.
Yeah, man, and we got the corrections guy. We got Jake, the corrections guy, and I know me and Eric both spend we spend time with that dude because it's like, man, these 36 moves can like save that guy's life, you know.
Absolutely.
And he talks about, you know, the combatives training that he received, the defensive tactics and stuff, and it's okay. But man, we put him through the ringer where he's got to control us in a bunch of different positions and apply submissions maybe, but also keep his wits about him so he's not just like diving onto the ground and pulling guard, you know, in a prison environment, you know. So anyway, yeah, man, I think it's just valuable stuff.
Well, it's been very enlightening, honestly, Justin. Some of this discussion that we've had during the show, I've learned a lot about you. Like I figured, I said pre-show, you and I are mainly about jiu-jitsu. We talk some combative stuff, some of what we do, my brother and I, and the circles that we run. But you know, usually when we're together, we're worried about jiu-jitsu and hanging out and having fun. So you know, I'm learning a lot about you that I didn't know before. So it's really cool. I have to say, maybe we digress for a second and go back to a little bit, close the loop on the medical side, because I mean, we're almost at an hour right now. We usually go about an hour and a half. So we still got some time if you do. As far as any major lessons learned in the medic field on deployments, do you want to talk about maybe, you know, two, three major lessons that you've learned on your deployments in some maybe possibly live situations?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one major lesson learned is the importance of leadership in a medical situation, you know, where, you know, every time there's been casualties, that's not the mission. You know, like there's a job that needs to get done, and casualties can't become the new mission. Like that could happen, you know, like I guess Black Hawk Down was sort of an example of that, you know, that we learned so much, like everybody learned a ton from October 3rd, you know, in that regard. But what I've learned is that the situations that go well when people are hurt and bleeding, and need to get to surgery, it's been like, yeah, there was the medic stuff got done right, but man, the leadership stuff got done really, really well. And that was staying calm and in control of the situation and all of the little ancillary tasks required to get somebody to surgery, you know. And I got to work with some Homeland Security guys, some HSI dudes, and that was one of the things we worked on was like, okay, we're going to do this. You know, we use the MARCH acronym: massive hemorrhage, airway, respiration, circulation, hypothermia. You know, and like that's our get the person under control and packaged. But a lot of what we worked on was like loading somebody in a car to get them, you know, lights and sirens where they got to go quickly. And a lot, they were kind of expecting all of the, you know, tourniquets and hemostatic gauze and all that stuff. And we did a bunch of that, but a lot of what we did with them was like the big picture situation of like, now we've got an officer down. Now what do we do? You know, and the pre-planning that goes with that and executing your plan, having a contingency plan and all that stuff. Because, you know, like, you know, we talk about getting people to bright lights and cold steel in the operating room, you know, and like, that's where the lives are saved. And like, what we can do now with fresh whole blood transfusion and damage control surgery, you know, it's like amazing, but the leadership has got to be there to manage the whole situation. And I, you know, one of my war stories is working with the big army, in Iraq, and watching the leadership fall apart once they took casualties. And like the medic stuff was going okay, but man, like the situation fell apart because assets weren't lined up to get people moved. and organizing the whole situation. That was good medicine. That was the medicine that we needed, and it kind of wasn't happening, and like actually our guys had to step in and take over the situation, because they were like, man, these aren't even our soldiers, but they had to manage it. And there's a bunch of stories like that where it was like, man, good leadership is good medicine,
Well, Justin, if I can kind of drive home what I feel like I'm understanding that you're saying, is that, and it makes sense, that the sexy things that folks think is combat medicine, of course, you're applying tourniquets, you're packing wounds, you're throwing on chest seals. All that stuff is kind of what, I don't know, for lack of a better term, the inexperienced or a person that just has, carries a kit like this and has a little bit of training versus the real world, is that the most important thing you guys are looking to do is to get them to surgery, because that's really where they're saved, right? I mean, obviously you guys no doubt save people in the field and have saved people, but that's ultimately what you're saying, having the leadership to make sure that you're getting those folks evac'd out to surgery, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. The privilege I had of working, in that special operations community is like the entire chain medically works together, where you got a relationship with the surgical team, the flight medics, and the medics on the ground, and your planner. Like it's a whole symphony when somebody gets hurt, and we recognize like the person, usually the first responder putting on the tourniquet, it's usually not the medic, is like stopping death right there or prolonging it in order to get the guy to surgery or gal to surgery, so that the problem can be corrected and the life can be saved, So really that healthy respect for surgery and knowing where, understanding the trauma system in the United States, I think is a really, really big thing. It's not super complex, but how do you utilize it effectively? Like that's going to save a life, making a decision about the right facility and not making assumptions about facilities and where to take people,
Well, Justin, go ahead, buddy. Please continue.
Well, one of the other lessons, like I wanted to share is like we can often get wrapped up in Gucci equipment. Scandal. I don't know anyone in 20 years of war who saved someone's life with a hemostatic agent. Okay, so like we spend crap tons of money. We still do on quick clot, Kaido gauze, combat gauze, combat gauze ACS, the little hacky sacks full of hemostatic. There's like 50 different kinds. There's Celox, there's all these different things. But, and don't get me wrong, like that's a useful thing. Like if you got shot in the neck, like I would I would really like it if you packed my wound with a hemostatic, but I think we can often put so much emphasis on having the Gucci equipment that we can forget those basic things. One of them being, like pressure, like stopping a bleed without the right equipment and improvising a tourniquet.
That's you, for a lay person, putting the pressure on it. You're trying to put pressure on an artery, right?
Yeah. And like stopping bleeding as a team, where somebody's getting, we call it proximal control above the injury, basically tourniqueting an artery with pressure above the wound, getting control there, especially on an extremity. But sometimes we can get so focused on like getting out a Gucci tourniquet and putting it on that we forget like those basic things, that were in your Boy Scout manual, in that like if you put body weight pressure on a bleeding wound and fill it with some gauze, you're probably going to get it stopped. I did the 18 Delta course before tourniquets were really a big deal, and like, we would we would kind of create our own tourniquet out of a cravat and a windlass and use it occasionally. But man, we were stopping bleeding with gauze and pressure. We didn't have hemostatics yet either, and like we did okay with that. So I wouldn't, I want to point out the false sense of security people can get by having that Gucci kit. And also your ability to improvise a tourniquet, which is really hard, man. You know, like I've seen people take belts off and like, man, struggle to get, you know, arterial control with a belt. It's really hard. But your Boy Scout tourniquet where you take a piece of fabric, tie a knot in it and find some kind of windlass and get the mechanical advantage to crank that thing tight, we'll get something stopped, you know. But like,
because it seems like something like that would stretch a little bit and therefore put more constricting action than a stiff belt. Is that kind of,
yeah. So yeah, once you try to add a windlass to a belt, like it's like the material is usually too rigid, you know. And there's some cool like Gucci tourniquet belts, you know, that are out there and stuff. But you know, if I was going to run training, I would include that, you know, and empower every layperson, you know, non-medical person on how to build a tourniquet. You know, one of the most stressful casualties I ever worked on was my own son who was choking in the backseat of my car, man. You know, pulled off side of the road, and man, my heart rate went through the roof. My vision closed in. I had all that training. I've done pediatric advanced life support 15 times and like all these different trainings. And man, when it was my kid, it got really, really difficult to sort through the problem, you know? Yeah. So like I tell you guys that story, just that quick story. There's a little bit more to it. There's some more details to it, but I give you that story just as this healthy respect for being able to execute a life-saving task, you know, under pretty severe stress, like building a tourniquet. Because man, could you imagine flailing, trying to like somebody's bleeding really bad, and they're with you. You don't have any of your kit with you, and you just cannot get this bleeding stopped. But there was fabric, there were windlasses around the room.
Somewhere there's a windlass.
Yeah, like, and you just hadn't thought of it, you know. And if you were like, man, what will work in this room and what won't, you know, and like a metal pen will often work.
That's so funny. I was grabbing this before you said that. I was like, I wonder if this would be a good one.
Well, and that's Justin, cool. Again, I think it's very important to highlight what you're saying, because I always, and Aaron is probably the same way, not probably, I know he is, that we always like to stop and let our audience think about certain things that are cues, right? And one of the things that the late great Dr. William April spoke about is trying to eliminate as much novelty as possible. And if you aren't even thinking about how you could improvise a tourniquet, like you just said, you may look past it and somebody could pass or extenuate due to that. But just the very fact that you said that is a mental rep that people, okay, yeah, I need to look around this room and think about some of the things that I could use as a windlass. And my T-shirt right now, I can yank off and rip up or I mean, I even have to rip it up. But no, I just wanted to draw that conclusion that that folks need to think about that. But more to the point, I mean, see, every time we do shows like these, Justin, Aaron and I we're just as much into listening to our guests. And also when typically we will re-listen to it. Not that we like to hear ourselves talk. Sometimes I get tired of hearing myself talk. But I enjoy listening to the shows again as an audience member, because I always learn or we always get these reminders that can save your life or keep you from doing something stupid. And I think that's awesome, man. I'm gonna add some improvised tourniquet to my thought process again, because I haven't been, because I'm always carrying, or for the most part, I'm carrying around some kit with me, both in the car and when I can, this ankle kit. And yeah, we cannot lose sight that we need to know how to do it without that gear. That's a good comment.
Well, and I want to put a fine point on this, Justin, that you said earlier in the show when I asked you about the time that, you didn't like to put a time on it, but you also put a calming, like Eric said, let's put a parking space in our listener's brain about this. Don't flip out, especially if, like you said, you've got a gunshot wound to your thigh, and maybe it is a really bad arterial bleed, but calm down to take care of it. It's not instant death. So I'd like that parking space of chill out. We've got a highly experienced Special Forces medic that has seen how this really works. So that's really good. I loved hearing that.
Yeah, man. Like I guess like a final comment on that. I think because of the units that I worked in, people often expected like really, really advanced stuff, and oftentimes, man, we would like to just say that we had a lot more years in the Army working on basic stuff and doing the basic stuff really well, and that very rarely did some like super advanced intervention save someone's life. But even like, even like tactics, like people go back to like principles of patrolling all the time. Like there's right things to do in a gunfight and wrong things to do in a gunfight. And that keeps you alive. And like our forefathers learned that, in Europe,
Yeah.
100 years ago, and they passed it along about like, keeping yourself safe. But I think that maybe that's a theme for this year, Eric. With jiu-jitsu, we had to go back to basics, but man, it's like we're spinning our wheels if we don't know fundamental stuff, And I'm kind of scandalized that on the jiu-jitsu part, there was so much I learned by going back to the basics. As like, I'm a purple belt, man. I've been doing this well over a decade. Trained with a whole bunch of different folks. But at the end of the day, if I'm being honest with myself, I had not completed and mastered like, that 36 curriculum, and I think that's important. And I think I would apply the same thing to the combat medicine stuff, is like really getting a handle on what tasks, knowledge, skills, and abilities you need to have, and mastering those basic things. That'll give you confidence under stress, that stress inoculation versus running after the latest thing, That's like medic culture stuff. Like medics are always going after crazy ideas, and it's cool. They're innovating, but sometimes we can like outrun our headlights and not focus on very basic things,
Yeah, that's good stuff, Justin.
Last comment. IV training is one of those things where like it's not medic training unless we do IVs, and that's a bunch of nonsense, man. It's just like I can think of 50 other things that we should do in a combat medic program other than start IVs, and like certainly that's a cool medic skill, but man, it's like, but I remember leadership being like, Doc, when are we going to do IVs? And I'd be like, dude, we're going to war. Like, we're going to Baghdad. It's going to be fine. Let's make sure we got this whole thing down, and you are not going to have to stick an IV in somebody. I promise you, and like, I would be lucky if I had the time to get access on somebody, when surgery's close by, so I just, that's one of those distractors, is like, we got to fit IV training in, and it's just, there is a place for it, but man, I can think of 100 other things you should do with your time,
It's telling. This is kind of funny. So, of course, combat lifesavers, not a big deal. I understand that, especially back when I was in the Army. You just hit it on the head. It seemed like the most important thing we were learning, and the medics acted this way, the instructors, man, it was learning how to give it a damn IV and be able to get the needle in properly. It did seem like that was the biggest objective from Combat Lifesaver back then. And the tourniquet was a no. You don't tourniquet until the very end. And then, of course, it seems that these wars taught us otherwise, in that in some cases, not all cases, but in many cases, you might even be tourniqueting first, minus what you said, the pressure. And now I've taken the combat lifesaver course several times, even as a civilian. And of course, you don't do needles anymore. Excuse me, we do tension pneumothorax, needle decompression. But as far as doing an IV, it's not in the program anymore in TCCC that I'm tracking.
Okay, real quick. I mean, literally a quick explanation of that injury that you just stated, Eric. What is that? Because I've heard it a million times. I don't know what it means.
Yeah, I shouldn't breeze over that and act like I really know, but it's a compressed lung, right? Let Doc explain it better than I will.
Yeah, here. So the chest.
Just real quick.
Yeah, so the chest. Guys are like, hey, we got to carry a chest seal. But if you look at war wounds versus like lower velocity injuries, right? Look, I'm sure you've seen pictures of people shot in the chest 9mm, even 45, and they're not like these giant gaping holes.
Yeah.
So one thing to remember is when we breathe in, our diaphragm drops down, and it's a suction, and it sucks air in through our trachea. And if you have a hole in the chest and your diaphragm drops down, it's going to suck air into that hole. Well, if it's a small, like a 9mm size hole, you're probably not going to encounter enormous problems from that. But if you encounter like 155 artillery shrapnel and it rips a hole in somebody's chest wall, you got to be able to seal that thing up because it's 50 times bigger than a trachea. And the path of least resistance when the diaphragm drops is pulling in through the chest wall instead of pulling through the trachea. And like I've simulated this on live tissue where you make a pretty giant hole, pull the ribs apart, and the thing suffocates. You cover it up, air goes back through the trachea. It's like, and it's a pump. It's a vacuum system. So the tension pneumothorax would be in the event that a bullet entered the chest wall, punctured the lung, and now the lung can leak air every time you breathe, and we've sealed the chest back up. And so now it's a closed container with a leak inside it. And as you breathe in, the air builds up in the chest. And the crazy thing with this is that it's not a suffocation death. It's a cardiac death. So the air can build up so much inside the lung cavity that it kinks your aorta, and the heart gets it's like the heart gets pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and that ascending aorta where it curves, it starts to get pushed on, and then boom, it kinks like a hose, and then the person just instantly is done. And if there's so much pressure in the chest that if you can throw a needle in and like gently relieve it pressure, the vessel can unkink. I mean that's the actual death by tension pneumo. It takes a while for that to develop, depending on the size of the wound, So it's not going to develop in a couple minutes. You would have to be like, the chest is sealed up, it's not venting on its own, air's building up inside the chest cavity. And the scary thing with that one is fragments. Where somebody gets completely peppered with shrapnel, like little zingers that go right into the lung, but they kind of seal up on their own in the chest wall. So there's like all these little specks, and you don't know if a fragment went in or out, and air's bleeding out in the lung, and you're just watching this person there. Are you having a hard time breathing? You feel like you're having difficulty breathing, and really monitoring the person. And if they feel like they do, oh man, I'm going right into I better just stop right there. I'm going down the tension pneuma rabbit hole, man.
No, that's.
So I'll and Aaron, if you had a comment,
no, that gave me an excellent ground level actually more than ground level, but that made me understand it completely.
That wasn't awesome.
Enough for me to have a grasp on it. Next time I hear it, I know what someone's speaking about.
And again, I speak only understanding it, and I mean, if I was asked to put a needle in a catheter right now, I'd probably screw it up. So I need some practice on that. But at the same time, Justin, I was going to ask you that question. Is that an over-practiced task for the average civilian in a TCCC is decompression needles.
That's tough, man. Because it has to do with proximity to surgery. Like if you're within an EMS system and you can get somebody to the hospital, like I don't think it's that big of a deal. I don't. If you're in a remote area where it's going to be a big delay to get somewhere, like absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean, and like there's a bunch of ways that pneumothorax can happen. And it gets a little bit more nuanced than that, but I mean, for sure, people have had their lives saved by that needle. People have also gotten damaged from the needle, but it being
people not
in the wrong
putting it
angle,
in right.
Yeah, and doing the wrong thing with it. So there's a risk to it, but like correctable things usually, as opposed to like dying of a tension pneumothorax. And a lot of times it's an insurance policy as you evacuate somebody in the chain. Like you got shot in the chest, Eric, you're not having difficulty breathing right now. You definitely got shot in your lung and you're like, I think I'm okay, but you're going to get on a 45-minute helo flight. I'm going to put a needle in and vent it just to make sure you start having a tension while you're flying, and like and that's like a combat medic point of view as opposed to like a civilian version where it's like, I'm not going to do the procedure unless you're symptomatic.
So then, but let me clarify this with the question. So this needle to vent, relieve pressure, is after a chest seal has been applied, correct?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And the thing to remember though, like in a small caliber gunshot wound, and this is that like slow down, take a deep breath, like back up a second, pump the brakes kind of thing. Like if somebody's down, especially kind of like in a civilian setting, and you expose the thorax so that you can see armpits, neck, back, everything. Because like you never know the trajectory of a bullet, man. You don't know. And a huge training scar, in my opinion, is telling someone that this is a through and through gunshot wound to the chest. Because in reality, you never know what you're looking at. And sometimes you have an entrance wound and nothing else. And you're like, what angle did it come in at? Did it go across? Did it get both lungs? Is it lodged in his spine? Like who knows? Is it in his guts? Like you just don't know where the bullet went. So really, we call it index of suspicion. You got to plan for the worst case scenario, which is like, I'm going to assume this bagged your lung in this setting because we're not going to know until we get imaging at the hospital.
Now, go ahead, Aaron.
Just real quick, and on the stopping a two-legged predator, just a side note. That's why we need projectiles that are tested through ballistic gelatin and other mediums to make sure that we've got the minimum 12 inches and maximum 18 inches so that it can handle going through those different angles and still hit vital tissue and organs and more anything, the upper thoracic great vessel junction. But I digress. I just think that brings up a good understanding for people to think about. Like you think that they think they're just going to shoot some guy right here, and it's like you said, it's going to go straight back towards the spine.
Man, all right. Last thing. We're going to keep doing this.
I'm already saying we've got more to cover. We're going to have you back on. Honestly, I knew that was going to be the case anyway.
So
go
body
for
armor,
it, brother.
Man, body armor is another big lesson learned, man. That is like my pet peeve. I know you've seen it where people love their kit, but then you look at where their plates actually sit, and man, their upper lung fields are exposed.
Like below the sternal notch.
You're like, hey man, and like it was good when they tried it on, but now they loaded it up with crap and they got uncomfortable and they pull it down. They grab their collar and they pull it down. And it goes, and like all this vital, like that's the arch of their aorta. And like a friend of mine got shot in the aorta, not wearing body armor, but like instantaneous death shot. that plate has got to cover up your lung fields and your heart. Like that's the kill shot we're trying to stop. Then the other thing is the side plates. So those are liver and spleen protection. And your 6x6 side plate should marry right up to your front plate. And a lot of times people will wear side plates on the side, and there's like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 inch gap between their front plate and their side plate. And man, like a spleen shot's a death sentence, man. Like good luck getting that thing stopped, or a liver shot. You know, so really I call them liver and spleen plates and your heart lung plates, you know. And if you think about it, man, your guts, for lack of a better term, but like your stomach and your intestines, they ride up really high into your chest cavity. And they consider in the surgical setting, any projectile injury below your nipple line is a gut injury. If you think about it.
Interesting.
We think of our rib cage as like my lungs going all the way down there, but they don't. The diaphragm comes way up inside. And so like that plate needs to be high. You know, like, yeah. And like, it was like all of the medics that I worked with, we were always like trying to harping on people like, dude, or their back plate was hanging low and their upper lung fields and their back were exposed. And it's like, dude, I can see your chicken wing sticking out, man. Your scapular sticking out both sides. And I can see it through your combat top, man. Like you need your back plate up higher. And they're usually like, shut up, doc. but that's what we do, man. We think horrible thoughts about the way people can get shot. But man, that is, you know, and if the Army, you know, I always pick on the Army, but like if the Army is going to invest in the right armor, it's like, man, we have all the data to show that like those liver and spleen shots, you know, right off the edge of the plate killed people, you know? So like close that gap, you know, and it's not a side view plate. It's a extension of your front plate.
Yeah, that's
soapbox complete.
No, man, that's an awesome, you know, thing to bring up because a lot of folks don't know. They don't know how armor should fit, and somebody with your experience, no doubt, they should be listening to you for certain. And I was just wondering when they would want to tell you to say, you know, they wanted to say, "Shut up, Doc." Did they also have to say Sergeant Major at the end?
No, they did not.
Just messing with you. That's awesome, man. Excuse me. Well, Justin, I think we should probably move to the closing of the show with a jovial discussion to end in the interview. But I'm just going to repeat myself. We're going to have you back on, and you're so humble. You know, you came on at the beginning of the show, you know, saying that you had saw some of our guests in the past, and you weren't sure what you were going to offer. But bro, I knew you would bring it, and you gave us some awesome content that definitely places you exactly where you should be on the show, man. If I can say so.
Dude, I so appreciate the opportunity, man. And like, if we can do another chat where we can talk about what I do now, especially helping people out of these professions, because man,
Yes.
It's like, it's the same crap, man. Cops, firefighters, EMS, like high pressure jobs for about 20 years. And then you just like, stuff happens, man. And like, when you have to leave those jobs, oftentimes, you know, like you get shuttled into a mental health pathway that might not be helpful, man. So if I can help one of your listeners who's retiring, it would be totally worth it, man.
We talked pre-show about your transition, and I want to talk about that on that next show as well, because I think that would segue very, very well into what your current profession is. So that's awesome. Well, Aaron, you wanna go ahead and take it?
Yeah. So, and I'll second real quick that, yeah, I can't wait to have you back on. That conversation sounds amazing, as this one was. But okay, so we have come to the point in the show that is the most important question of the entire show. and that is, what are your 3 favorite bands and or musical artists?
All right. So here we go. So I'm going to throw Audio Slave out there right away. Okay. I grew up, like in the 90s. I remember when Pearl Jam 10 showed up on the shelf at Harmony House, and hearing, God, I think every single one of the songs in that on 10 were played on the radio, but just, I was like, man, I don't know what this is, but I love it. I was sort of a Soundgarden fan, but when I moved out to Seattle and it's like gloomy, like perpetually, and you're stuck on I-5 in traffic and Black Hole Sun comes on the radio, man, it's a totally different sound. And you're like, I get it. Like, I got it, and if you're in the bright sunshine, North Carolina, listen to Black Hole Sun, it doesn't make any sense, man. But then, like Chris Cornell and the whole Audio Slave thing, man, I think that the poetry there is out of control, So then I can say that I started listening to Black Keys before Black Keys were cool.
Yeah.
And like most people, I was pretty sure Auerbach was a black guy by the way he sang. And then when you see he's like this raspy voiced white guy who plays a blues guitar, you're like, holy crap, man. But just like, hearing their original stuff, man, it just blew my mind, and it's so simple, but just loved it,
And let me interject on that. Their guitar tech, I believe it was, created a really, really cool pedal company, guitar pedal company, distortions and stuff, called Earthquaker Devices. So just a little bit of side musical trivia there.
Man, I love hearing that from you. Like, I don't have any musical capability at all, man. So that's a world I don't
real quick. They would look something like these little boxes. Now, when you hear a guitar, let's say you hear jazz or a funky guitar or something like that on an old funky tune, but then you hear Jimi Hendrix and there's that kerrang, or Metallica, or the Black Keys with distortion. That's what these are. They make rock and roll. They turn a guitar into rock and roll. So
I love it, man.
Okay,
I learn something new every day, man. That's awesome. Yeah. So number 3 is the record company. And that's like, I had no exposure to record company, man. And like on my Spotify playlist, I think listening to like a Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats playlist, I stumbled on the record company, man. And like, that's
I've
actually
never heard of them. I'm gonna have to check them out.
Yeah, so we're talking about an actual band.
Yeah.
Oh, see, because when you said that, dude, I usually know any of the band names that people bring up on during this question, so I'd never heard of that.
Yeah, man. So the record company, their playlist on Spotify is our JiuJitsu rolling playlist in the morning.
So then I guess I've been hearing it and I just didn't know.
Yeah, so I mean, so it's got like some of the stuff like the Black Keys on there, R.L. Burnside, just some really cool stuff, man. Stone Foxes, yeah, it's cool, and it's like nice and chill, but it's a bit heavy, and we can roll to it, and it's not techno, and it's not the good old like jujitsu reggae that everybody plays.
Well, see, do you see, audience members, I'm just shouting out to you that are listening to this. This is why we asked this question, because we've got a gentleman that's seen a lot of stuff, been overseas in the sandbox, so to speak, and then he lights up about music. Because I call it the visceral draw of a great song that makes you have to turn it up, especially in your car. So it's awesome that you lit up about that. Rarely do we have a guest that doesn't light up about the music question. And so, frankly, anyone that I'll set one guy aside who I respect greatly that got stumped by this question. But otherwise, if you don't like music, man, I don't know if I want to be your friend. You know, you're just from a different place that, I can't relate to. So, man, that was good stuff. Now I've got a new band to check out, and man, thanks for coming on. We got to have you on real soon again to continue the conversation, because I think our audience is going to dig the heck out of this show and then the further conversation. Yeah, buddy, don't feel like looking at our guest list and think that you didn't hang with those guys, because you certainly did, man. Just nuts stuff, man. Cool.
Awesome,
yeah,
man.
It was awesome.
Man, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, I made a brief foray into podcasting, and this stuff is not easy. So a lot of respect for what you guys are doing, man. It's a ton of work people don't realize to put a show together. So
it is, brother. And I want to, is yours still RSS feeding? It's still out there in the ether.
Yeah. It's a special operations medicine podcast. Cool. So I think I did the first 6 or 7 episodes, and now there's passed it off, and now there's like 100 some episodes. Man,
we'll check it out, and we'll find some of your episodes
right there, man.
Well, that explains why you have a real microphone.
Exactly. There you go. That's why I got the Yeti.
So Justin, real quick before we jump off here, I don't know if you got my text, but do you want me to cover Friday's class, Daybreakers?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Okay. If you're offering,
yeah,
yes,
yeah, I'm gonna have time Friday, because I've been doing this. I don't know how long it's been now. These dadgum software updates we've been doing for weeks and weeks. So yeah, man, if you're game, I can take class on Friday. Up before the enemy, right?
Right, man. Yeah.
If I could turn this around, well, I'm going to join that crowd tomorrow.
I'm looking forward to hearing about it, Aaron.
Speaking of, I probably need to start working my way to bed too. But
yeah, I still do have to rise a little early tomorrow, so I'm probably going to be going to bed soon myself. Well, with that said, Justin, man, this has been awesome, brother. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, man. Aaron, I don't know if you're heading out to North Carolina, but man, it would be, how cool would that be to connect at the school, man, and we get some rolls in?
Oh, I'll be there. It might be this year, but I'll be there. I'm sure, at least once a year I'll make it there.
Okay.
So that'll at least be the go. And goal. Crap. So yeah, that'd be fun. And I appreciate the welcome and invite. So appreciate it.
All right, fellas. All right. Well, have a good night.
See you Friday, buddy. I look forward to it.
Take it easy, guys. Good night.
nothing left for you.